this is Modeler. This is the scene you get when Lightwave is first loaded. This is the default configuration of the display. We have 4 windows, each giving us a different view. So let's just create a object real quickly and then explain how things are put together. Just creating a box here. We have a box. It's a 3-dimensional object. We're seeing our perspective mode. We're seeing it the top, the back, and the right side. Now the important thing to know here is defaults that are perspective in the upper right is a solid flat shade. This is all the same object. It is being shown as solid because that is the level of rendering we selected. I could select wireframe, so it looks just like this if I'd like, and I could go over here and have this be shaded like this was before. I can also go in and change this one to perspective if I like that better, or if the occasion calls for that. I'm going to go back to back and wireframe, so we're back to the default settings. The important thing to know about objects, we're just going to jump right into what objects are made of. They're made up of 2 different things: points, as we see here, and polygons. Now a point, they're referred to as points, or sometimes as vertex or vertices. These are bits of data. Points don't actually exist. If I select one, that is just telling the computer I have a file here and I'm specifying this location that is this far on the Z, this far on the X, and this far on the Y. So the information on that point, I can even bring that up. Point info, the X, Y, and Z position is there. And that point is point number 5. That's the serial number. So if you would open up the computer file for this object, you would see a list of 6 points, 1 through 6, and their numbers, and that is what this object is. It's about as basic a 3D object as you can get. However, if you're building dinosaurs or spaceships, it doesn't matter. They're all made up of points and polygons. Some of them have a lot of points and polygons, but really the basic DNA, the basic building block of every object is points and polygons. And the polygons are just surfaces that are strung together with points. You could think of the points as being like a clothespin, and the polygon as being a piece of cloth, say like a piece of latex that's just strung up, stretched between the points. So a point is pretty obvious. It's just a single dot. I'm going to go to polygon. That is the polygon. So the third element of an object is something called the surface. Each polygon can have its very own surface name. Right now, because I just created this, it has the default surface name. But I could select one, and we'll get to selection in just a second, and give it a different surface. And that is done under Detail. If we look, we can see Surface has a Q button next to it. So my hotkey for surfacing is Q, which I use all the time. Never use this button. And we'll call this front, or if you call it front of box. Okay, here's a stumbling block. This gives me the color right here, and I can change the color. I can click on these numbers, slide them around when I name it. And let's get to wireframe shade, and we can see that color has been changed. I'm going to do the same this time I'm going to hit the Q button because it's so much faster. Top. I want to change that to front. See how this is ghosted out? Only happens when you make a brand new color. Otherwise, you have to go to something called the Surface Editor, which again we will get to later. I'm going to change that color. This object now has 3 different surfaces. The gray is the default surface, and it's actually called default. Open this up, we can see our listing: default, front, and top. So an object is made of points, polygons, and surfaces. We manipulate either points or polygons by selecting them and then modifying them. We select things 2 ways, and this is a big leap, and there's going to be a lot of big leaps in the beginning. And some of this you'll find it with just using the program and putzing with it and getting familiar. It's one of those things that it's confusing at first, but once you catch on, it will become so natural you won't even think about it. Selecting a point, I click, hold down my mouse button, and draw the mouse over the points, and I can select them. We can see how they're selected in the view and also my perspective. To deselect, I let go of the mouse button, then click on it and hold it down again, draw it over, then it deselects. Okay, once again. Oh, and to deselect everything, I can click on an empty space on the side. Everything gets deselected. I'm going to click and hold down. So I have these. Say I want to have the diametrically opposed points selected. So I can do this, and it's hard to tell in these top, bottom, and side views, and that's why this perspective comes in handy. I'll click on this one, deselect that, click on that one. I now have the 2 end ones selected. And now, if I want to modify that, say move, I click on my move tool, and only those points are affected. Same thing goes with polygon. I click on my mouse, hold it down, draw it over the edge, and those polygons get selected. When I let go and click again, it serves to deselect. It works a little bit different when it's in flat shaded mode, because I can click on the front of it and it gets selected or deselected. Not in wireframe mode. The other way of selecting, and this is kind of dragging through it, but these are very important concepts because you can't do anything until you have this down. Clicking on my right mouse button creates a lasso and allows me to lasso certain areas. Now in the box it doesn't seem that impressive, but if you're building a T-Rex, this can become really important. So right mouse button allows me to select, I let go, and I can deselect. Now the problem comes in, okay, I've selected that, I've let go, but I also want to select this one, and it won't let me. Well, convention is you hold down your shift key and it allows you to multiple select. And the exact same is true for polygons. I'll deselect this, I'll select this one, and I want to select these down here, so I hold down my shift key and they are selected. Not real impressive so far, but this is the very basics that you need to know to start working in Modeler. And another important concept, very important, is the idea of our pivot point. When you're building in Modeler, the heavy black lines, this is the center of the universe. We can zoom out way out to not infinity, but to really big or really close. And if you get lost, important hotkey, you can jump to your display, and I think there's a set fit all. There it is. Just learn that hotkey, A. It automatically scales everything to your scene into every window. Very handy. So the pivot point is the center here. As in, when you save this object and save it into, load it into layout, everything refers to that pivot point there. Now in Modeler, you can rotate things anywhere and it'll go. However, when it's saved, that pivot point is still right there. In fact, let's do that. Let's save the object. Save object as box. I guess we'll save it as box pivot. And we'll jump into layout. Use my hotkey, which is the plus button. And find box layout. There it is, box pivot. And we can see there's my pivot point. Not in the center like you would think, because this is my object. The pivot point should be in the center, but it's where the bold line was in Modeler. Very confusing things for people when they're first starting out with Lightwave. The other confusing thing is everything in this layer is a single object. So if I create some more, you may think that this is, in a way, this looks like three different objects. We have a cube, a ball, and a cone. I'm going to save this. Save object. Jump over to layout. And my hub is working, which means it's dynamically updating. It's great when it works, let me tell you. It's a single object. My current object is being treated as a single object because it is all in one layer in Modeler. Even though they're not connected, it is still considered and treated as a single object. Very important that you understand that. And finally, the thing to understand in Modeler and with objects, once you've got down the idea of points, polygons, point of rotation, and surfaces, one more thing you need to understand is the concept of layers. Now layers, you're able to take things. I'm going to switch to polygon mode, select all of this to a cut. If you used any program, any type of creative program, even a writing program, you should understand cut and paste. Select, cut, and paste. I now have three layers to this object. Now these are layers similar to Photoshop layers. Technically, this is still a single object, because when I do save object, it saves them. It saves all three layers in a single object, and it's listed right here. They act very, very much like three separate objects, but they're saved under a single file. Now when I switch to layout, and it should be updated, yes. I have my basic, my first, second, and third layers. Now before, when I rotated it was a single layer, everything moved together. Now, they're behaving very much like separate objects. And for all intents and purposes, they are separate objects, but they're saved as a single object with different layers. Why would you want to do something like this? Well, it makes a lot of things easier. Say you're building a car or a fire truck, and you're always going to want to have, the doors of the fire truck have to be separate, the ladder has to be, you have to be able to move that separately, but you don't want your files all over the place. It's really handy to have, or even the wheels. You want to have everything together. Now that's one example. Another example is when say you're dealing with a logo, and the logo might have like 3 different letters and then some kind of swoosh to it. Really handy to save it all in a single layer, or a single object in different layers. Now, one final thing that you need to be aware of, and I'm just going to quick show you this. We have foreground and background. Foreground means it's highlighted. Background, if you look at the upper right, you have your little hash marks. If I click on the bottom half, it puts an object, the dark object, that's my background layer. There's nothing in the world I can do to affect that background layer. But say I wanted to line up my box with that, or underneath, or make it look when it comes in like it's sitting on top. I put something in the background layer. You use this all the time. Or this one. And once again, to multi-select, switch this around. We'll have the cone sitting on top of here. To multi-select layers, say I want to have 2 objects in the background. Hold down my Shift key. I have 2 in the background. Conversely, I can have 2 foreground objects, and then 1 in the background. And whatever is in the foreground, that's what gets moved. That's what gets affected. Now, because nothing is selected, everything is affected. If I just wanted to select a ball object there, oops, accidentally selected the top of the box. Okay, well, I'll go in and deselect that and move it, and there we go. Turn off my move tool, click on the side to deselect everything, grab that, move that, and you will be amazed at how soon this all becomes second nature. And now I want to move everything so it's centered. So I multi-select, I have all 3 layers selected, I move here, and I do a save. I just hit the S key because that's my hotkey for saving. And see if it's been updated. Sure enough, there it is. I can go in and move things separately. One final thing to be aware of in Modeler, a common mistake people make, it's not really a mistake, but it's something you should be aware of, is the scale of your objects. Now, Lightwave has something called a default unit, and you can set that. I suggest working in metric because it's more scientific. Some people I know hate metric with a passion, but it makes the math a whole lot easier. But you do have the option of working with English units. Lightwave likes to have objects around the 1 meter size. You have a lot of play. I mean, you can go kilometers, you can go millimeters, or for English people, you can go miles and miles, or fractions of an inch. However, Lightwave likes things right around the 1 meter or the 1 yard scale. And I suggest that when you're building things, to keep things about that scale. Now, how do you know what scale you're in? Well, there's a couple of ways. Right here at our crosshairs, if you look over to the left, it disappears when I get there. You can see my X, Y, and Z coordinates readouts. I move up, I'm measuring, okay, 1 meter is right about there. I said keep things around the 1 meter scale. That's pretty close. When I say close to that, I'm still thinking 10 meters is still around that area. There are several reasons for doing it, besides the fact that Lightwave likes things right around 1 meter. Some of the more advanced things, especially with bones, they get a little flaky if your objects are too big or too small. But we're going to be getting into surfacing and creating your own surfaces or shaders. And some of the surfacings they're scale dependent. If you think of a surface like contact paper that you would buy at the 5 and dime, and you have contact paper with little duckies on it, and you're buying, and you think, well, I have great contact paper, and it might work great for doing your closet, but if you're wanting to put contact paper with little duckies on it on a battleship, that's not going to read real well, when you're looking at the whole battleship. However, Lightwave doesn't care what size things really are, so if you scale that battleship down to about 1 meter, scale your cabinets up to about 1 meter, you can use that same surface. Doesn't seem like a lot, but it will matter in the long run. Also, when you're building, if you're building things to scale, like a house, and you're building a chair and a Ferrari, and a house with a door, you want everything pretty much in the same scale, just because when you bring it all together later, you want everything to fit. And if you're building, if you know you're going to be building things to scale, say you're doing an architectural thing, you can go in and check the numbers, and it's been my experience, if you have the physical object in front of you and you're building it to scale, that just helps. It keeps you honest, it makes your modeling better. So to review, all objects are made of points and polygons. Polygons are just surfaces that are strung together by these points. These objects can have, every polygon can have a unique surface name. It can only have one surface, but each polygon can have its own. An object can have several layers. The layers behave as if they are separate objects. If those items are in the same layer, they behave as a single object, even if they aren't necessarily touching. When nothing is selected, everything is affected by the tools. If only one thing is selected, that is the only thing that is affected. Now, I cannot deselect this while the tool is active, so I need to deactivate the tool. Sometimes you can get lost trying to remember which thing is activated. The shortcut to deactivating a tool is the space bar. Right now it's moving. I hit the space bar, that tool is gone, and I can reselect or deselect. To select things after I've let go, I hold down the Shift key. To select things, I can draw the mouse over it. If I let go, I can still select more by holding down the Shift key. To deselect, I let go of the Shift key, draw my mouse over it once again, or I can use my right mouse button and lasso. The center point, the 0 point, that becomes my axis of rotation when I save the object. One thing we didn't mention yet is the undo. Previous versions of Lightwave Modeler have the undo. There it is, undo. I'm using the 7.5 configuration because I've had to shrink down my screen to fit within my screen capture utility. It just has been kind of pushed off the screen here. I like having the undo right in front of me. Some people are more familiar with using Control Z as an undo, and you can switch that in your interface options with your keyboard shortcuts or your edit menu shortcuts. Just like we did it in layout, I prefer the 7.5 style, or oddly enough as it's referred to here, edit menu layout. For some reason this is called the 7.0 style. I just find it much easier for teaching. Students, when they're first learning it, they don't want to have to jump into using hotkeys. They like having the button right there. And once in a while, you've got your fingers busy and it's just much faster to click on undo. But those are the important points of using Modeler. One thing we haven't touched on is expanding the scene. Lightwave 8 has this really great button here that expands the one view. Click on it again. The shortcut for that is the 0 key, which does exactly the same thing. Whichever window you happen to be in, that one gets expanded. You'll find yourself using that all the time once you start modeling. Once again, pay attention to your scale. It's really easy to overlook. Your surface, you go in, you can change that. You can add new surfaces because nothing is selected here. If I add a new surface, call it all, and because it's a new surface, it lets me change the color. Because nothing was selected, everything got changed. I'll click on my undo, and it backs it up. You have a number of levels of undo, but it does tend to eat up a lot of memory the more undo you use or you set it for. But that is set in the options, and we're going to save that for a little bit later. But that is how you create a basic object under the Create tab. You select parts of it and you modify it.